What makes an idea worth pursuing? Perhaps when that seed of thought won't leave you alone, nagging and pulling you for months and months, it becomes time to surrender to the doing and get to work. My name is Flavia, and I am the future creator and founder of Sappho's Home, a brand encompassing handmade objects and rituals to be shared, driven by a passion to make daily moments more inspired. I say future creator and founder because Sappho's Home is the idea, and I have succumbed to the realization that the idea won't let me rest until I see it through. But it doesn't exist yet, and I want to bring others into the beginnings of the journey, not just share something when it's shined up and ready. One day, almost jokingly, a creative prompt came to me. What if I made the objects born from the question, what did Sappho's home look like? As in Sappho, the Greek poet, first recorded female poet, from Greece, the island of Lesbos, who was reportedly queer. It seemed cheeky and a funny, punchier way to frame the way this project was taking shape in my mind. One sentence that in a way captured the idea quickly of creating work that felt queer and Mediterranean, and also functional and creating an interior living space. But then it hooked on. What would Sappho drink her coffee from? When she wrote her poetry, she would take a break for lunch. What would her plate or bowl be? What vessel would hold her candles that she might have burned as she worked into the night or took a lover? Was there a rug under her feet when she stood after slumber? What vessel would she place freshly collected lavender bouquets in? Of course, I don't and didn't feel compelled to make some historically accurate recreation of her time. But as so many have done with the enigma of Sappho and the fragments of her poems that remain, I meant it as a creative jumping point to then project my own fantasies and visions of interior spaces onto, a world for me to make and share. Sappho's Home was born. I have been making things, testing techniques, writing ideas, and firing clay. During baby's nap time, on lunch breaks from work, and on weekends. But it's not enough, and the nagging pulling tethered to this fiery idea is only growing. It's whispering that it's time. Make it real. Build the world. So, join the journey with me as I build Sappho's Home. Okay, so it feels like a weird time to be picking up a camera, which I've never done in this way. I've done some video work in my installation practice, but never talking to a camera, filming myself in like a more documentary way. And I am trying to start this project, this business, this passion, Sappho's Home. And it never feels like the right time to say I'm ready to share. Certainly not how early in the process I am right now, just kind of tinkering and experimenting. And also because a lot in our life is changing, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. But this is where things are at. And I finally got to the point where it just feels like today is today, and that's valuable. And recently, my family and I went to Italy for an entire month. And it's a totally once-in-a-lifetime trip, especially for two working parents like myself and my wife. Our son is still young enough that he could be away for a month in September, and it's not going to interrupt school. Selfishly, and on the Sappho's Home side of things, this was amazing because it got me off of looking for inspiration on my phone and actually going to a place that's deeply meaningful to me and a place that's deeply connected to the inspiration and the impetus for Sappho's Home, which is Italy, and then even more specifically Sicily, where we spent 2 weeks. And that was looking for architectural inspirations and all of that, yes, but in a way I know that place, so it wasn't seeing, some new museum or some new church that I had never seen, but just being present with the sort of visual stimulus of that place that's so significant, and also just physically being somewhere that feels very spiritual and connected to my soul, being near the volcano, Mount Etna, soaking in the very, very salty water of the Mediterranean. And then, yes, being surrounded by amazing ceramics, seeing the beautiful Maiolica painting pattern that is true to Sicily, and just sort of being in that, not in memory and not online, but just being physically present in that space was truly amazing. And now we're back. Things are a mess. We have to unpack our bags and, just get back into normal life. And at the same time, feeling so inspired from that trip, stealing every free moment that I have to sort of continue developing and thinking about what Sappho's home is going to become. Sometimes you just got to start by cleaning up the dog poop in the yard, you know? When I think about the meaning of home as I build Sappho's home, plants in the garden feel essential to a home that's alive and embodied. Personally, tending to the garden grounds and connects me to the earth, and the shapes of the natural world always make their way into my studio practice. I don't know much, and am experimenting. And in the garden, that feels okay. I started growing cut flowers first, then built garden beds to grow vegetables. In the garden, there is only what is, and trying to respond to the environment accordingly. Sometimes it fails, and other times it yields something amazing. Growing food connects so deeply to a need for nourishment, but also connection. Especially as an Italian woman, cooking is such an innate and generationally ingrained way to show love and create community. To be connected to the ingredients that we cook with makes the act even more meaningful. There is also something inherently rebellious and witchy about growing our own food, medicinal plants, and remedies. Leaning into our connection with the earth, moving slowly, and being aware of the months it takes to grow a tomato all feel similar to the presence and process of making a ceramic plate. The garden feels filled with life, meaning, and connection, but it's also simply beautiful, fun, and ever-changing. I don't quite know concretely how the garden will become part of Sappho's home, but I know it will. Let's look at some ceramics, shall we? As I mentioned, I'm thinking about Sappho's home primarily in terms of ceramics right now. That doesn't mean I don't have grand visions for all sorts of objects that are not just ceramic, but that's where things are starting. I was doing a lot of sketching and pulling, symbols and imagery from mythology, from the Mediterranean and from Sicily specifically, and kind of reworking some of them and redesigning some of them. And whenever I transferred those to ceramics, it just felt super forced and unnatural. The only one that kind of survived that initial testing period was this little bowl plate that has this sort of cheeky little sun with hands kind of wrapping around. So I'm going to keep that test as sort of a reference point. And I did kind of come back to it actually in the end, but we'll get there. So I wanted to do something that still felt really bodily and really embodied, because that's always where I make work from, and maybe a little bit more urgent and looser and less tight and less forced. So I ended up actually doing some tests with slip, like a contrasting slip with just my fingerprints, sort of creating like almost the idea of like a trace of all the places and all the times that this had been touched by someone else before, or maybe touched by me in making it, before it then like became yours. These tests were really fun. It felt super immediate in that way. There was like that urgency and that messiness, but it still felt like an aesthetically really interesting and beautiful object. I did these little lines on the bottom as well, and I think that they're missing something, but they're getting closer. I also think that this is not quite the right size. It needs to be a little larger to be like the morning coffee mug of my dreams. At least the amount of coffee that I drink, it needs to be a little larger than this. I was also playing with, other forms. So I have another test with that same technique as a bowl. And I felt like it still translated well, and I still really was enjoying this way of working. This is also the first time the mug, I think, has it too, that I took some little letter stamps and stamped in Sappho's home. So it felt like the first time it was real, I was putting Sappho's home on the bottom. But yeah. I also, wanted to try different colorways, so I did the exact same clays, but the reverse. So the white clay body for the piece, and then the contrasting black clay as the fingerprints. This is one of those tests, and I think, for obvious reasons, it does not work for me. So this is a throwaway, but still worth trying. This one still needs to be glazed, but it's, getting back to sort of some of my favorite vessel forms, and still experimenting with, a different clay body, but that fingerprint technique of sort of painting with slip around. This was actually really early on, before I even started really experimenting with patterns or treatment techniques, and just sort of like making something to make something. It's a little bit wonky, and it was a little bit of a failure. I don't know if you can see all the bubbling on the bottom with the glaze. But I don't know, I think there's something really beautiful about this, and I'm glad that I made it, so I might document it as well. Now getting into when things started to really gel. I was super busy with work at the time, and I felt like the fingerprint technique was still missing something. It didn't have kind of the like symbology, the narrative element that I was hoping for. And so I finally, I think, like allowed myself to really let go and just sketch, and I had to move quickly. I wasn't going to be so intent on perfection with these vessels. And I was like working while my son was playing right outside the studio in the driveway with his trucks, and he would only do that for a few minutes and then run off, and I would have to go see where he was. So it kind of broke down my perfectionism a little bit and actually brought back the symbology. So this is, I feel like, an important part of the process was making this piece, because it felt like it had the right amount of kind of messiness and hand-built quality, and I used the fingerprint technique to paint the vessel with slip. And then I sort of just went wild, and I didn't think too much about like what the meaning was behind all the symbols. I gravitate to plants, I gravitate to bodies, and so these eyeballs growing out as flowers from these plants just sort of like happened, and it felt very loose and intuitive and strange and quite right. Following that, I made this other vessel. It's supposed to be an amphora, and then the handle's cracked, so it's now kind of like a jug, either like a wine jug or a water jug, with the same technique. Finger painting with the contrasting slip, and then just doing carving. So I think bringing in a lot of, again, the symbols that I gravitate towards: the sun, the eyes, legs, hands, plants. Snakes are big for me, more eyes and plants, and just sort of going crazy, making it feel maximalist, but also sort of, because of the palette, not too maximalist. I don't know. There's so much left to explore, but these last two pieces really kind of unlocked something in how I want to proceed with the project. So let's document them and get them out into the world. I think even though they're tests, I think that they're beautiful and interesting, and I want to see what other people think about them. So I want to take some photos and maybe share them on social media and just see if anyone's interested in them, or I don't know. We'll see what happens.